Good evening and namaskar. Welcome to the Indian podcast on Bharatvarsha and its stories. The residue of Macaulaism. Now for the second residue of British rule, Macaulaism. The term derives from Thomas Babington Macaulay, a member of Governor-General's Council in 1830s. Earlier, the British government of India had completed a survey of the indigenous system of education in the presidencies of Bengal, Bombay and Madras. A debate was going on whether the indigenous system would be retained or a new system introduced. Macaulay was the chief advocate of the new system. This, he expected, will produce a class of Indians brown in skin, but English in taste and temperament. The expectation has been more than fulfilled. There is a widespread impression among educated classes in India that this country had no worthwhile system of education before the advent of British. The great universities like those of Takshashila, Nalanda, Vikramshila and Udantipuri had disappeared during Muslim invasions and rules. What remained, we are told, were some of the pathshalas in which a rudimentary instruction in arithmetic and reading and writing was imparted by semi-educated teachers, mostly to the children of the upper castes, particularly the Brahmins, but the impression is not supported by known and verifiable facts. Speaking before the select audience at Chatham House in London on October 20, 1931, Mahatma Gandhi had said, "I say without fear of figures, being successfully challenged, that India today is more illiterate than it was 50 or 100 years ago. And so is true for Burma. Because the British administrators, when they came to India, instead of taking hold of things as they were, began to root them out. They scratched the soil and began to look at the root and left the root like that, and the tree became perished." What Mahatma had stated negatively, that is in terms of illiteracy, was documented positively, that is in terms of literacy, by a number of Indian scholars, notably Sri Daulat Ram, in the debate which followed the Mahatma statement, with Sir Phillips Hartog, an eminent British educationist, on the other side. Now Sri Dharampal, who compiled India's science and technology in the 18th century, some contemporary European accounts in 1971, had completed a book on the state of indigenous educations in India on the eve of the British conquest. Sri Dharampal has documented from the British archives, particularly those in Madras, that the indigenous system of education compared more than favourably with system obtaining in England at about the same time. The Indian system was admittedly in a state of decay when it was surveyed by British collectors in Bengal, Bombay and Madras. Yet, as the data brought up by them proved conclusively, the Indian system was better than English system in 1. Number of schools and colleges proportionate to the population, the number of students attending the institutions, the duration of time spent in school by the students, the quality of teachers, the diligence as well as intelligence of the students, the financial support needed to see the students through school and college, the high percentage of lower class Shudra and other caste students attending these schools as compared to the upper class, Brahmin, Kshatriya and Vaishya students, and 8. in terms of subject taught. This indigenous system was discarded and left to die out by the British, not because of its educational capacity, but was inferior, but because it was not thought fit for serving the purpose they had in mind. The purpose was, first, to introduce the same system of administration in India as was obtaining in England at the time. The English system was highly centralized, geared towards maximization of state revenues, manned by gentlemen who despised the lower classes and were therefore ruthless in suppression of any mass discontent. Secondly, the new system of education aimed at promoting and patronizing a new Indian upper class, who in turn would hail the blessing of the British Raj and cooperate in securing its stability in India. This indigenous system of education was capable neither of training any administrators nor raising such a social elite, not at home anywhere. The system of education introduced by the British performed more or less as Macaulay has anticipated. Hindus like Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, Swami Vivekanand, Lokmanya Tilak, Mahatma Gandhi, Mahamana Malviya, Veer Savarkar, Shri M.S. Golwarkar, to name most or only few notable amongst those who escaped its magic spell and rediscovered their roots, were great soul, strong enough to survive the heavy dose of deliberate denationalization. For the rest, it had eminently succeeded in sweeping an ancient and highly cultured off its feet. Macaulay does deserve the honor of whole-ism or ism, of which we have not seen the last yet. It is not easy to define the doctrine of Macaulayism in as authentic terms as we would do in case of Islamism or Christianism. Doctrinally, Macaulayism is quite diffused. It does not veer by a historical prophet whom it proclaims as the latest as well as the last and the best. It does not bestow a monopoly of truth and wisdom of a single book. It does not lay down a single code of conduct distilled from the doings of a prophet and the sacerdotal traditions of the church. Nor is Macaulayism malevolent like Islamism or mischievous like Christianism. It is rather mild and well-meaning, more like an imperceptible breeze which blows in silently, fills up the psychological atmosphere, and creates a mental mood, inspires an intellectual attitude, and finally settles down as a cultural climate, pervasive, protean, and ubiquitous. Unlike Islamism and Christianism, Macaulayism does not employ any meticulously matured methods to propagate and proliferate itself. It is not out to use a specified section of Indian society as a vehicle of virulence. It is not a potent potion like Islamism, which destroys the body of a culture in one fell sweep. It is not subtle like Christianism, which subverts a society surreptitiously. But at the same time, it is creeping toxemia, which corrodes the soul of a culture and corrupts a social system in slow stages. And its target in every section of Indian society. Yet we survey the spread of its spell over Hindu society, particularly Hindu intelligentsia, we can spot some of its paralyzing processes. The most prominent are the following 5. Second, a positive if not worshipful attitude towards everything in Western society and culture, past as well as present. In the name of progress, reason and science, nothing from the West is to be rejected unless it is first been weighed and found wanting by the Western evaluation. Third, an intellectual inclination to compare Hindu ideals and institutions from the past not with their contemporaneous ideals and institutions in the West, but with what West has achieved in its recent history, the 19th and 20th centuries. Fourth, a mental mood to judge the West in terms of the ideals and utopias it proclaims from time to time, while judging the Hindus with an all too scrupulous reference to what prevails in Hindu society and culture at the present time, when the Hindus have hardly emerged from the long period of struggle against the foreign invasions. Fifth, a psychological propensity to scrutinize, interpret and evaluate Hindu culture, history, society and spirituality with the help of the concept and tools of analysis evolved by the Western scholarship. It is never granted that the Hindus too have a well-developed concepts and tools of analysis derived from their own philosophical foundations, that it would be more profitable to use these concepts and tools of analysis for a proper understanding of a Hindu heritage, and that it is less than fair to employ alien and incompatible methods of evaluation while judging this heritage. If the Hindus use their own concepts and tools of analysis to progress and weigh the Western heritages, our Macaulayist always throw up their hands and denounce the exercise as unscientific and irrelevant to the universe of discourse. The intellectual and cultural fashion and fads of our Macaulayist change as freely and frequently as intellectual and cultural climate in the West. Now it is the English utilitarianism, now the German idealism, now Russian nihilism, now French positivism and existentialism, now American consumerism. Whatever be the dominant trend in the West, it immediately finds its flock among the educated Hindus. But one thing remains constant. The platform must first be prepared in the West before it could and should find the audience in India. And this process of approving, rejecting, judging, and justifying, which Macaullism promotes among its Hindu protagonists, does not remain a mere mental mood or an intellectual inclination or a psychological propensity, that is to say, a subjective stance on men and matter. It inevitably and very soon expresses itself as a whole lifestyle which goes on rejecting and replacing Hindu mores and manners indiscriminately in favor of those which the West recommends as the latest and the best. The land which the new styles of life are imported may be England, as up to the end of Second World War, or the United States of America, as ever since, but it must always be ensured that the land is located somewhere in the West Hemisphere. Foreign is always fine. The model which are thus imported from the West in ever increasing numbers need not have any relevance to concrete conditions obtaining in India, such as her geography, climate, economic resources, technology, talents, administrative ability, etc. It is imported model if the imported model fails to flourish on the Indian soil and in the India's ecosystem of cultural conditions. These must be beaten and forced into as much of a receptive shape as possible, if need be by ruthless use of state power. But if the respectable remains imperfect, even after all these efforts, let the finished product reflect the imperfections. A model imported from the West and implanted on Indian soil, even in half or a quarter, is always preferable to any indigenous design involved in keeping with the native needs and adaptable and adapted to local conditions. Starting from the secular and socialist state and planned economy, traveling through a casteless society and scientific culture, and arriving at day-to-day consumption in Hindu homes, we witness the same surreal scenario unfolding itself in an end endeavor. Our parliamentary institutions, our public and private enterprise, our infrastructure of power and transport, our medicine, public health, housing, our crockery, table manners, even the way we gesticulate, grin and smile have a carbon copies of what currently doing in the West. Drain pipes, well bottoms, long hairs, drooping moustaches, girls dressed up in jeans, parents being addressed as mom and pa and mummy and daddy, demand for convent schooling and matrimonial ads, and native speaking their mother tongues is in accent after the English civilian who had helpless to do otherwise. These are perhaps some small, insignificant details which would not have mattered if the Hindu had retained pride in more substantial segments of their cultural heritage. But in the current context of no-towing before the West, they are painful portents of a whole culture being forced to feel inferior and go down the drain. The Hindu may sometimes need to feel some pride in his ancestral heritage, particularly when he wants to overcome this sense of inferiority in the presence of visitors from the West. Macaullism will gladly permit him that privilege, provided Kalidasa is admired as the Shakespeare of India and Samudragupta is certified as the India's Napoleon. The Hindu is permitted to take pride in the piece of native literature which some Western critic has lauded. Of course, the Hindu should read it in its English translation. He is also permitted to praise those specimens of Hindu architecture, sculpture, painting, music, dance and drama which some connoisseurs from the West have patronized, preferably in an exhibition or performance before a Western audience. But he is not permitted to do this praising and pride-taking in native language, nor in an English which does not have an accepted accent. The Hindu who is thus addicted to Makolism lives in a world of his own, which has hardly any contact with the traditional Hindu society. He looks forward to day when India will become a society like societies in the West, where the rate of growth, the gross national product, and the standard of living are only criteria of progress. He is tolerant towards religion to the extent that it remains matter of private indulgence and does not interfere with the smooth unfoldment of a socio-political scene. Personally, for him, religion is irrelevant, though some of its ritual and festivities can occasionally add some color to life. For the rest, religion is so much obscurantism, primitive superstition, and in Indian context at present, a creator of communal riots. It should not therefore be surprising if this self-forgetful, self-alienated Hindu, who often suffers from an incurable anti-Hindu animus a la Neeraj Chaudhary, turns his back upon the Hindu society and culture and becomes indifferent to their fate. He cannot help having not much patience with the traditional Hindu who is still attached to his spiritual traditions, who flocks to hallowed places of pilgrimage, who celebrates his festival with solemnity, who regulates his daily life with ritual and sacraments, who honors his forefathers, particularly the old saints, sages and heroes. He also cannot help being indulgent towards those who are hostile to the traditional Hindu and who heap contempt and ridicule on him, no matter to what community of faith they belong, though he may not share their own variety of religion or ideological fanaticism. The traditional Hindu, on the other hand, wants to live in peace and amity with all his compatriots. He is normally very tolerant towards his Muslim and Christian countrymen and gladly grants them the right of their own way to worship. He goes further and quite often upholds Muslim and Christian religion as good as his own. He shows all due respect to Muslim and Christian prophets, scriptures and saints. He does not try to prevent anyone from discussing, dissenting, even ridiculing his religion and culture. He never mobilizes murders mob against those Hindus who do not share his convictions about his ancestral heritage. He turns a blind eye towards gods and goddesses being turned into cheap models in calendars and commercial advertisement, nor does he go out converting people of other faiths to his own. The traditional Hindu, however, does not get stirred when Muslim and Christian cross the limits and threaten the unity and integrity of his country. He does want to retain his majority in the only homeland against Muslim and Christian attempts to reduce him to a minority by fraudulent mass conversion. He does believe that Hindu society and culture have a right to survive and put up some defense in exercise of that right. But the Hindu addict of Makolism stubbornly refuses to concede that right to Hindu society and culture. He cannot see the need for defense because he cannot see the danger, and he has many strings to his bow to run down the Hindu who dares defies his diktat. His attitude can be summarized as follows. To start with, he refuses to recognize any danger of Hindu society and culture even when irrefutable facts are placed under his nose. He accuses and denounces as alarmist, communalist, chauvinist and fascist all those who give a call for self-defense to Hindus. Better, he explains away the aggression from the faith in terms of aggression which Hindu communalism has committed in the first instance. Next, he paints a pitiful picture of the aggressor as a poor, deprived and downtrodden minority whom the Hindus refuse to recognize as equal citizens constitutionally entitled to just share in national cake. Third, at a later stage he assumes sanctimonious airs and assigns to the Hindus an inescapable moral responsibility to rescue their less privileged brethren from the plight into which the Hindus have pressed them. In any case, the Hindu stands to lose nothing substantial if they make some generous gestures to their younger brethren, even if the latter was slightly wrong. Fourth, in the next round, he harangues the Hindus that any danger to them if ideally real and worth worrying about, arises not from the external aggression against them, but from the injustice and oppression in their own social system, which derives away its less privileged sections towards other social systems based on better premises and promises? Does not Islam promise any equality of social status amongst its great ideals of brotherhood of men? Does not Christianity present an example of dedicated social service a la Mother Teresa? Fifth, if the Hindus are not convinced by all these arguments and become bent upon organizing some sort of self-defense, he comes out with a foolproof formula for that eventuality as well. The Hindus are advised to put their own house in order, which in his opinion is the best defense they can put up. They should immediately abolish the caste system, start interdining and intermarrying between the upper and the lower caste, particularly the Harijans, and so on and so forth. If it never occurs to him that the social reform is a slow process which takes time to mature, and that in the meanwhile a society is entitled to self-defense and in the interest of its sheer survival. Sixth, if the Hindus still remain adamant, he tries his last and best ballistics upon him. He suddenly puts up a spiritual mask and lovingly appeals to Hindus in the name of their own long traditional of religion tolerance. How can the followers of Gautama and Gandhi descend to the same level of Islam and Christianity, which have never known religious tolerance? The Hindus would cease to be Hindus if they also start behaving like the followers of Semitic faith, which have been conditioned differently due to historical circumstances of their birth. But he never dares put in a single word of advice to the followers of Islamism and Christianism to desist from always having in their own way. He knows it in his bones that such an advice will immediately bring upon his head the same abusive accusations which Islamism and Christianism hurl at the Hindus. This is the outcome which he dreads worse than death. He cannot risk his reputation of being secular and progressive, which Islamism and Christianism confer upon him, only so long as he defends their triads against the Hindus. But the stance which suits Macaullism best is to sit on fences and call a plague on both houses. The search for fairness and justice is somehow always too strenuous for a follower of Macaullism. The one thing he loathes from the bottom of his heart is taking sides in a dispute, even if he is privately convinced as to whom is the aggressor and who is the victim of the aggression. He views the battle as disinterested outsider and finds it somewhat entertaining. The reports and reviews which some of our eminent journalists have filed in the daily and the periodical press about happenings in the Meenakshipuram and other places where Islamism is again on the prowl leaves an unmistakable impression that these gentlemen are not members of Hindu society but visitors from some outer space on a temporary sojourn to witness a breed of lesser beings fighting without Tweedledum and Tweedledee. An adherent of Macaullism can always afford to take this neutral, even hostile stance away from and above Hindu society, its problem and its struggles, because in the last analysis, he no more regards Hindu society as his own or as his indispensable benefactor. He has already managed to monopolize most of the political and administrative power in his country and the best jobs in business and professions. He has secured strangleholds on the most prestigious publicity media, the political upstarts, and the neo-rich look upon him as the paragon and try to mold their sons and daughters to his image. But what is uppermost in his mind is not his conscious calculation, is the plenty of patrons, protectors and paymasters he has in the West, particularly in the United States of America. The scholars and social scientists over there in the progressive West approve and applaud whenever he pontificates about India's socio-economic cultural malaise and prescribes the proper Occidental cures. They invite him to international seminars and on well paid lecture tours to enlighten Western audiences about the true state of things in this unfortunate country and the rest of the underdeveloped world. He can travel extensively in the West with all the expenses paid in the lavish scale. Even in this country, he alone is entitled to move and establish the right contacts and social circles frequently or frequented by the powerful and prestigious from the West. And God forbid, if the worst comes to the worst, the fanatics like RSS fascists or the Muslim fundamentalist or the communist totalitarians take over this country, he can always find a safe refuge in the Western country or the other. There are plenty of places which can use this talent to mutual profit. The salaries they pay and the expensive accounts or the expenses account they allow are quite attractive. The level of living with all these latest gadgets is simply lovable. In any case, he has all the sons and daughters, nephews and nieces, cousins and close relatives unconcerned in all those cushy jobs over there, the UN agencies, the fabulous foundations, the business corporations, the universities and research institutions. So Hindu society, with all its hullabaloo of religion and culture, be damned. The society, and not he, stands to lose if he is permitted to work out of his plans for progress in peace. In any case, the society cannot pay even for his shoes getting polished properly. With this, we come to the end of the 4th chapter. I hope that you will ask other people to listen and subscribe. Thank you.